What's up guys, Virgil here for JRPG Central, and recently I've gotten a bunch of new subscribers here on the channel. So first of all, welcome to the channel. Hope you enjoy the content, hope you enjoy your stay. And secondly, I thought it would be kind of cool to do a video that would kind of help you guys get to know me and my tastes a little bit better. So today we're going to be doing a countdown of my top 5 Super Nintendo JRPGs of all time. Before we get into it, as with any top whatever list, you will more than likely disagree with some of my picks, and that is perfectly okay. This is the internet, there are opinions galore here, totally cool to disagree, just be cool about it, just be nice, don't be a dick, basically. Now with that out of the way, let's get right into the video. Starting off the list at number 5, we have Lufia 2, Rise of the Sinestrals. This was a Natsume-published RPG that seemingly not a lot of people played back in the day, which is a shame because it's a truly great game. One of the standouts for me are the game's dungeons, which had these Legend of Zelda-style puzzles that were a pretty novel concept for an RPG at the time. Few other JRPGs, if any, had this level of interactivity to their dungeons. It also featured some surprisingly well-written dialogue for a game released in the very early years of Western Japanese localization. The biggest issue I have with Lufia 2 is its soundtrack. It can be incredibly repetitive and really grating at times, especially its dungeon theme. If you've played it, you know which song I'm talking about. Moving on to number 4, which is my favorite number, we have Final Fantasy V. The version I have here is the Super Famicom version, which is the version I recommend playing. You want to play the fan translation, unless you can read full Japanese, and you can use a system like the Retron 5 to patch the fan translation onto a Japanese copy like I have here, or you can buy one of those repros that includes the fan translation on the cart itself. Though if you go that route, be sure to buy it from a reputable source, as there are just so many terribly made, cheaply made Chinese copies out there. So if you do go to do that, be sure that you go through someone who's trustworthy. If neither of those work for you, the game is also available on the GBA and on the PS1. Oh, and there's also an iOS and a Steam port. Kind of, if you want to do that, I guess. Out of those, I most definitely recommend the GBA version above all the others, as the PS1 version has terrible load times and an awful localization. And unsurprisingly, the iOS and Steam versions look like dog shit. So, in complete order of recommendation, you have the fan-translated Super Nintendo release, the GBA port, and the Steam and iOS ports, I guess. Anyway, with that out of the way, I get to talk about Final Fantasy V now. I don't know what it is about this game, but I love its story and its characters. Its world felt so vast and mystical to me, and where Final Fantasy IV is completely medieval with a little bit of sci-fi thrown in at the end. And Final Fantasy VI is a more like steampunk, modern medieval. Final Fantasy V carves out a really nice chunk in between in terms of tone. It's a game that I think is so underrated, even among Final Fantasy fans. And I haven't even mentioned the game's job system, which is easily the game's biggest hook. Introduced in Final Fantasy III and much improved upon here, the job system gives you a ton of options in terms of gameplay styles. If you've ever played 4 Heroes of Light or the Bravely series, this is where the roots lie. It may not have the deepest story or the prettiest graphics, but in my opinion, Final Fantasy V is just pure, whimsical fun. Okay, for the top 3, this is where it gets really tough for me, in all honesty. Honestly, all 3 of these could probably be interchanged pretty easily, depending on my mood or what year it is. I just love them all so much, and they're all 3 of them are just god tier. But this is my current list, this is currently how I feel about them, so let's get right into number 3. And for number 3, we have Chrono Trigger. Yeah, I know, no fantasy box or anything. Sad. What can be said here that hasn't been said a million times before? For the time, the game was a landmark title. Innovating in storytelling, gameplay, and even the graphics department, Chrono Trigger redefined the AAA JRPG and set a standard in quality for everything that came after it. Its deep time-traveling mechanics, especially for the time, led to multiple endings, and with a New Game Plus mode, it gave players a ton of replay value. As far as which version I would recommend, personally, I would actually recommend the DS version. It's way cheaper than the Super Nintendo cart, and honestly is, in my opinion, the definitive version of the game. Especially if you have like a DSi XL laying around, this will look amazing on it. The original Super Nintendo version is great, but it has a so-so localization. The PS1 version, as with all of the PS1 Final Fantasy games that were released, have terrible loading times, and although it has a bunch of new content in it, you can get that new content as well as even more new content in this DS version. There is, of course, also an iOS and a Steam version, and while the iOS version is, if memory serves me correctly, garbage like all the other ones are, the Steam version, which just came out, launched pretty rough, but Square has been patching it regularly, and it's actually shaping up to be a pretty good version of the game. So depending on how that Steam version shapes up, it would go DS version, and then Super Nintendo, or maybe even the Steam version. That we'll have to kind of wait and see on, but all three of those versions are great ways to play the game for sure. Up next for number 2 is a game that is very, very, very near and dear to my heart, and that is Earthbound. Unlike other games on the list, what rises Earthbound to my number 2 spot isn't pretty graphics or deep gameplay, but it's superb writing. The writing is snarky, dark, and self-aware in moments that you would least expect it. To this day, I don't know that there's any other game that can hold a candle to Earthbound in terms of its writing, but that isn't the only thing it has going for it. Before the age of games like Persona 5 becoming mainstream successes, having a JRPG in a contemporary setting, much less a contemporary American setting, wasn't just unusual, it was unheard of. The game is a parody of classic Americana, and it works way better than it has any right to. It also has some interesting mechanics like HP ticking down point by point instead of all at once. This allows you to heal yourself before a mortal blow takes you out, if you're fast enough. Unfortunately, whether it was due to the terrible ad campaign that literally claimed that the game stunk, or the lackluster graphics compared to other RPGs at the time, Earthbound didn't sell well at all and quickly fell into obscurity. Since the game's release, however, it's garnered a cult following, and for good reason. Earthbound is a truly special game, and one that deserves to be on every JRPG fan's bucket list. So, for my number 1 pick, this is going to be a little controversial, but just hear me out, alright? My number 1 pick for my all-time favorite Super Nintendo JRPG is Final Fantasy Mystic Quest. Don't laugh, this is a game that I think gets way more hate than it deserves, as I think it's one of the best RPGs. This game sucks. It's Final Fantasy VI. I could probably talk for an hour about what makes Final Fantasy VI so great, and maybe I will someday. But for the sake of time, here are my condensed thoughts. For many, including myself, Final Fantasy VI, or as it was known in the States, Final Fantasy III, is the absolute pinnacle of the series. It's got everything you want in a great JRPG. It's got a beautiful score written, of course, by Nobuo Uematsu, a great expansive cast of characters, and a dark and gripping story. The localization done by Ted Woolsey is not only his best work, but one of the best localization jobs of the era, with a very coherent script and plenty of memorable lines. And let's not forget that Final Fantasy VI introduced us to many series-long themes like limit breaks and cactars. Final Fantasy VI is the very essence of a classic in my eyes. It has so many memorable moments that will probably forever solidify it as my all-time favorite Super Nintendo JRPG. Anyway, that does it for my personal top 5 Super Nintendo JRPG list. Hopefully this kind of gives you guys a little bit of a peek into my general tastes, specifically with Super Nintendo at least. I'm sure this list could change as there are a few titles that I do own that I haven't had the time to play yet, and those could very easily kind of creep their ways onto the list, so I may make an updated one at some point in the future, but for now, this is my top 5. But down below, I want to know your top 5 lists. I'm really interested to see the variation, especially in the top 3, of your guys' lists and just the games that you guys pick. As always, thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have a great day, and I will catch you guys in the next video.